Doctor of Philosophy in Yoga and Vedic Sciences from Vyasa University. And also he has a second DLit from the Ram Manohar Lohia Ayodhya University. And he's been also awarded by Kanchi Sankaracharya Math for his immense service to Vedic sciences as National Eminence Award over last 40 years of his seva to Vedic sciences. We all have been hearing him on different platforms, social media, and on different topics of Vedic knowledge systems, like in terms of Ayurveda, Jyotisha, deeper principles of yoga and Vedanta, and the yogic interpretation of Vedas. So we warmly welcome Dr. David Frawley ji into this event, and we are very blessed to start Ayur Vichara event with his presence and blessings. Namaste, Vamdev ji.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be with you today, AVP Research Foundation and Ayur Vichaar. And I'm very honored to be associated now with Krishna Kumar again. Of course, we wish he was here, but he was certainly a great inspiration to all of us. And I'm also very happy to see how Ayurveda is growing and flowering in India, as well as throughout the world, and also how the connections of yoga and Ayurveda are coming up in an important way. And it's a very good topic you brought up, Vedic concept of mind, chitta, in the post-COVID era, or also we could say in the new high-tech era. I've been asked to give a short description of my journey into the Vedic sciences. It began when I was 16 years old, coming into contact with yoga, yogic teachers. I had an interest that developed into the Sanskrit, also into Vedanta. And I was fortunate to come into contact with some great teachers, Sri Anandamayi Ma, the Ramanashram, and also to the Sri Aurobindo ashram. So that gave my foundation, and I kind of went from one to the other: yoga, Vedanta, Vedas, Ayurveda, Jyotish, and finding out how closely they were connected and how important they are for all of us to know the universal knowledge, transcendent, all the rest of it, and yet the very profound knowledge of every aspect of human life, behavior, whether it's daily activity, diet, herbs, movement of prana, development of the mind, so many things. So gradually this opened up for me. I also visited India many times, many great teachers. Dr. Balavashta of Mumbai and Pune introduced me to a lot of traditional Ayurveda. Many years ago, Dr. B.V. Raman and the Jyotish, and many great gurus, including Swami Dayananda of Arsha Vidya and Swami Narayan, Pramukh Swami. I won't go on, there's so many. Shankaracharyas of Kanchi, also of Sringeri. And then that inspired me to share this knowledge with the rest of the world, to write on it. And I received an interesting role, which was to bring the knowledge back to India in the sense that it being articulated from another perspective from the West gave it a new insight for people in India. And this journey, of course, goes on. And the next point I would like to address is the whole difference between psychology in the Indic traditions, yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, and its place in the West today, Western psychology, modern psychology, and modern medicine. In modern medicine, we are taught that brain, mind, and consciousness are all the same. In other words, mind is a function of the brain, consciousness is a function of the mind. Mind is ruled by brain chemistry. We treat it through pharmaceutical drugs and other type of physical treatments. There is a psychology based upon analysis that also looks to the physical personality, the social personality, but not to the essence of our being. In the Vedic system, we are taught that brain, mind, and consciousness are different but related. And of course, mind and body are different but related. Basically, the brain is an instrument of the mind. And at a higher level, the mind is an instrument of consciousness. Who we are as human beings is an embodied consciousness called mind. As Aurobindo said, a mentalized material being. And we forget that at the core of our being is a consciousness beyond the mind, beyond the mind, beyond the body, and beyond time, space, and karma, universal, infinite, transcendent, and immanent. Paramatma had manifest as the Jivatma, or the reincarnating, a rebirth aspect of consciousness. And so it is a much broader view that opens up so many horizons of yoga, meditation, transcendence, moksha, and a different system of psychology, which is aiming not to reduce us to the brain, but to calm and purify the body, the brain, and to then also calm and purify the mind so we can discover that inner consciousness that is the essence of reality. And this is very important today because we are seeing an increase in psychological disorders globally. They're almost epidemic, we could say. So much depression problems in the West, attention problems and learning problems in children, bipolar disorders. But at the same time, instead of understanding the mind, we are trying to force the mind into new patterns, again, mainly through pharmaceutical agents or artificial behavioral changes. And then we are facing the challenge of the century, which is our new information technology. In fact, sometimes I like to say today that we have three level of drugs that people are getting addicted to. Of course, recreational drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, but even the digital drug, because the digital world, with all of its value, still changes the vibratory rate of the brain, the mind, the prana. And so what it does, it moves too quickly. And so there's a loss of power of attention, focus. There's an easy influence from the external world, from other people, loss of self-awareness, loss of self-identity, and so much confusion about who we are, and a greater dissociation from nature. Yoga itself is a psychology. Yoga, as Yoga Sutras, Chitta, Vritti, Nirodha, calming the disturbances of the mind, but even more specifically, removing our identification with the mind. You are not the mind. Mind is your instrument, like your computer. You are not the body. the body is your instrument, like the vehicle you have or drive in the material world. You are pure consciousness beyond that. And in this, yoga uses the concept of chitta as the mental field in the broadest sense, defined by the three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And yoga is, of course, defined as samadhi, and basis of yoga is chitta shuddhi, or purification of the mind. It's also called chitta prasadana, chitta shodhana. This is the basis also of Vedanta, clearing the rajas and tamas out of the mind, and of course, out of the related body, prana, and senses. So yoga is a psychology, removing the kleshas, or the disturbances, factors of suffering in the mind. And if we look at the philosophy, we see that we have a concept of the antakarana, or the internal instrument for the mind in the broadest sense. And here we have chitta, often more defined in this context as the background memory field of the mind. Buddhi, the factor of cognition, discernment, and even agency. Manas, the instrumental sensory activity of the mind, and ahankara as the ego or identified aspect of the mind. Ayurveda defines disease as rooted in prajna parada, which is essentially wrong functioning of the mind, or specifically the buddhi, the cognitive discernment aspect of the mind. And we have a fundamental buddhi dosha, or wrong function of the buddhi, which is to identify ourselves with the body, the mind, and the external reality that sets in motion the ego, processes of ignorance, raga dvesha, attachment, and ultimately addiction. Mind is an addictive mechanism, and this whole dehatma buddhi, or the I am the body idea, and the need to remove rajas and tamas by turning the buddhi within to the atma, rather than having it go into simply the outer. And what happens is this buddhi dosha, or wrong functioning, wrong judgment of the buddhi, causes what we can call chitta dushti. It contaminates the mind, the mental field, the memory, rajas and tamas, emotional ups and downs, wrong judgments and opinions, arrogance, all the rest of it. And it then brings about a wrong use of the mind and the senses. And of course, in Ayurveda, wrong use of the senses is another cause of the disease process overall. And then it works down to the physical level. We eat the wrong food, we have the wrong action, we don't take care of our body properly. Mind and prana are also connected, so the prana is disturbed and agitated. And then we get caught up again in all the illusions, dualities, and difficulties related to wrong use of the mind, extending into wrong use of the body, and all the many resultant diseases and disharmonies that arise. And as we know, the key factor in well-being is immunity. And in Ayurveda, we define immunity in some detail, the importance of ojas, the importance then out of that of being able to renew or rasayana, and also the importance of mind and prana, as well as the tissues of the body. But there is also a psychological immunity, which is our power of attention, concentration, inner awareness, self-awareness, through which we are not taken in by the illusions, disturbances, emotional disturbances of the outer world and the society around us. So what we're seeing today in this post-COVID era, and starting with, of course, the COVID, a lot of isolation, fear, panic, often socially projected, media projected, so that our psychological immunity is getting reduced. Our physical immunity also, of course, we interact more with other people, our diet is suffering more. And then, as a concluding part of this introduction, it's very important that we link the mind with nature, just as we need the right natural food for the body, we need the right natural food for the mind, which is all of our sensory impressions born of nature. We need to compensate with our outer world issues by developing more of our connection to nature through contemplation, meditation, mantra, sensory therapies, and connecting to our inner self or Atman, which is pervading all of nature, so that we can go back to the wisdom of the Vedic sciences, the wisdom of the great rishis and yogis, and reclaim our true nature, which is Satchidananda, beyond death and sorrow. Body is going to have its pain, suffering, and death over time. We want to maximize our well-being. Mind also has its limitations. We have an unlimited inner being, and that is what we need to bring back into life. And that is why yoga and Ayurveda are so important to this information technology era, this ecology era, and this era where we should give birth to a new planetary and global consciousness, but we're still being trapped in the same old conflicts and divisions and duality. And we need a medicine that takes us to that inner consciousness and inner prana. The outer methods, pharmaceutical agents, are important and necessary, particularly in acute conditions, but we need to develop our inner immunity, inner balance, inner well-being through connecting with our inner self and inner prana and all the forces of nature. So we welcome a discussion with you, and we are very happy to be with you here. Hari Om.
So thank you for this insights, sir. So I think a bit of interaction we will have. So I think you have touched that whole topic of consciousness and mind. We in classical Freudian approach, we consider mind and consciousness as one entity, but what are your takes, and how do we in fact experientially understand the duality of consciousness and mind from your perspective, which is a hallmark of Vedic thought process as such, Professor?
Well, you see, the mind is an instrument. In many ways, it resembles our computers. It has a memory bank, it has language functions, it has all of its conditioning and programs, imagination, reason. So it is an instrument. And we can observe how our mind works, which means that we are not simply the mind. In the Vedic thought, we have to understand we are the seer, the seeing state of observing, and we can change the mind and silence the mind. Even in deep sleep, the mind is put to rest, and that helps us out quite a bit because the mind is causing a lot of stress during the day. And we can train the mind. You know, mind is also based upon language, education, mind of a child, and we can have our own insights and original thoughts. So clearly we are not just the mind. We even say my mind, You can observe your thoughts. For example, if you observe disturbed emotions, you'll note that they will become reduced. So there is an inner sense of self that is behind and beyond the mind. And in that, we have a higher level of knowing and the ability to discern and also purify the mind. In other words, not running after the dualistic illusions, emotional disturbances, but turn the mind within. Mind is a reflection of consciousness. It is not conscious in itself. But if we turn the mind within, we can move into that inner light of pure awareness, and then we no longer identify with the mind. It's not I am the mind. Mind is my instrument. Body is your instrument. And in that, we will use the mind in a new way, which is to unfold the inner consciousness, not simply to get caught up in outer images, ideas, names, and forms. Hari Om.
One more thing, sir, which always comes to our discussion is we all talk about Atma Gunas, like when we talk about several gunas, whether Paradi Gunas and Guruadi Gunas in Ayurveda and other Vedic philosophy. We have Atma Gunas, where we say Ichha, Dvesha, Parimad. These are what we call as the realm of emotions. So when the realm of emotions are at the level of mind, if we say, but then why do we tell them as Atma Gunas, not Mano Gunas, like, you know?
Yes. Well, first of all, we often use the term Atma for mind or self or even Ahankara. And in Sanskrit, terms are used in very fluid ways at different levels, like Chitta, for example. Even Atma, Paramatma, Jivatma. And we have to understand that emotion is a force of nature. It's a prana. For example, fear arises from something that threatens our physical being, desire, which is attractive to the physical being. They're rooted in instinct. And so they actually have the ability to circumvent the mind. You know, if your life is threatened, then you focused on that particular issue. You're not caught up in learning a particular topic. So control of emotions, calming the mind, then frees us from a lot of external conditioning. So we must understand how the mind works. Mind works again through rajas, tamas, and also through the dualities. For example, in Yoga Sutras, mind is kleshas. And first klesha of the chitta is avidya. Avidya is called ignorance, but it's not ordinary ignorance. It is lack of atma vidya or self-knowledge. It's not lack of knowledge about the material world or the realm of science. And that avidya gives rise to this asmita or ahankara. We think we know what we do not know. The avidya, lack of self-knowledge, makes us arrogant. And I hate to say that so many intellectuals and institutions and even academia are functioning through the rajasic buddhi, not the sattvic buddhi. So they're very opinionated and very judgmental and very proud. And then the mind gives rise to raga dvesha, attractions and repulsions. If I'm a separate entity, I must know what favors me and what goes against my life in order to survive. And then the mind ends in abhinavesha, which I tell you is addiction. We can say, oh, clinging to life, but it's essentially addictive patterns. The mind has an addictive nature, it wants to repeat itself. You know, if you are chopping potatoes and you go to sleep, you see yourself chopping potatoes. If you do the same thing when you get up in the morning, then each morning you tend to do that. Mind is a conditioned entity. So the mind tends to addiction unless we know how to hold to the power of attention, dharana shakti. And that's what so few of us have today. We give our attention to anything. We let anything occupy our minds. Sometimes I tell students that we let people into our minds that we would never let into our homes. And think about it. The mind is a more intimate place to let someone or some force into than simply being present in your house. The power of attention, whatever you give your attention to, you bring that into your inner being. So buddhi, we need the judgment so we don't give our attention away superficially, and we develop an inner power of attention. Now, in our information technology era, the power, this average scene in a movie is what, 10 seconds? We have microseconds and changes in computer games. I'm not saying that's always against the power of attention, but the yoga is about holding a power of attention steadily for an hour. It's not just about holding that as a value. The more you are attentively aware, the more you understand. So we need to understand the mind in order to have well-being, and also know what to learn and what not to learn, who we are and who we are not, and the limitations of our society. Human being is a very limited species. We may have been around for 300,000 years, they say now. And we've had many great sages, but the average human mind is very much caught up in illusion, duality, love and hate, fear, desire, anger, disturbances, which then cause physical, social, and even world problems. So we really have to understand, calm, purify the mind for well-being on all levels.
Thank you, sir. In fact, if you look at a very natural question as a student of Ayurveda comes, we study in our text that mind has two qualities, anuttvam cha ekatvam. That means the micro as well as the unifying nature. Anuttvam cha ekatvam manusau dvau gunau smritaha, we have talked. Now, when we also have seen in Kavya that Chanchalo hi mana, the quality of mind is that it is kind of moving around with a great speed. And that's why we can see everything as one entity, like seeing a film, though it is different photographs. But since it's, and then you talk in yoga where you have to bring down the speed of mind to realize your real self. And it says that prano baddhate yena, prano baddhate yena, manastena baddhate. That means there is a connection which is told in relationship between prana and the mind. So can you just, throw some light on these two approaches or a kind of things which have been told in our Vedic text?
Yes, now this is clearly explained in one of my favorite texts, the Yoga Vasishta. Chitta Spanda and Prana Spanda go together. And we can even see this in our lives, the movement of the breath and the movement of thought, and also anything that affects us emotionally and the mind. So there is that connection. Now, as you said, the mind has a pointed awareness, you might say. But we put together a series of points in order to get the idea of a whole. That's why the mind is moving quite a bit. And of course, the mind is connected to the senses, and the senses are bringing in information from all levels. And only what we give our attention to do we actually register. But the mind also has a curious nature, which is connected to consciousness. If you can make the mind one-pointed, the mind becomes boundless. The mind becomes infinite. The infinitesimal and the infinite, we might say, are one. And we need to understand there is also the mental field. Now, dharana is based upon that one-pointed function, which is like seeing. It's at a point. But dhyana is based upon the full scope of awareness, which is more like hearing. because so there is that unity of mind as the point and the circumference of the circle, which of course have their energies, which then connects us to the power of consciousness. Consciousness can see the whole of space in a single point. It can experience the whole of eternity in each moment. As we say, Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, smaller than the smallest and greater than the greatest. So the mind has a reflection of some of these qualities, but the nature of the mind through body and prana is to look outward, and then it runs after all the sensory function. It needs to do that. We need the mind as an instrument, but it is an instrument of practical functioning in the material world and an instrument of dealing with the body and the society and of course, the realm of science, but it is not the means of knowing our true nature or pure consciousness. That is why in Vedic thought, we have the outer knowledge of name, form, number, which is the knowledge of the mind, but the inner knowledge of Atma, the Atma Vidya, beyond name, form, and number. We need both, and the Vedic sciences teach us that inner knowledge. And we also have to remember that consciousness, Chit, Chaitanya, is the most powerful force of healing. It's connected to the inner prana, which is actually a connection of a form of consciousness itself, Chit Shakti. And if we have that inner connection of well-being, we can have psychological immunity, calm and purify the mind, which in turn allows us to calm and purify the prana and the body. In fact, one of the best ways is to calm and purify the mind is, of course, through the prana.
Sir, I think one very important thought you have put forth is about psychological immunity. Can you kind of very practically explain or throw some more light on how this psychological immunity is very important in this post-COVID era, and how do we practically implement this psychological immunity and health?
Well, let's look at physical immunity first. It's the ability to resist diseases. It's also the ability to endure heat and cold. It's the ability to have more energy and counter stress, all the factors of ojas, kshamatva, so the mind has that as well. See, the mind too is receiving a lot of energies and impulses from the external world via the senses, and it's also functioning through the motor organs, society, thought, and of course, the emotions. So psychological immunity means that we are able to endure difficulties, psychological stress. We are able to endure flattery or insults from other people. We are able to hold to our inner core awareness even in times of difficulty, social problems, political problems. We are not simply a product of what sensory influences are happening at a given moment. We have the ability to be detached, to perceive, to give our attention to contemplate, to meditate. And of course, we also know that physical immunity is connected to prana. We have to have a strong prana and movement of prana. For example, we need to have a circulation of prana around the body as a whole. Otherwise, you come down with a cold when the pranic circulation breaks. So too, we need a circulation of the mind, and we need an interconnection of the mind with the consciousness. And that gives us psychological immunity, so that we're not simply taken in by the psychological disturbances around us. We don't just simply react quickly with fear, desire, anger. Of course, the different doshas will push their own emotional triggers like pitta and anger. So then in that case, then we are able to have a psychological well-being, which just like physical well-being will allow us to resist disease, so that instead of having psychological, emotional imbalances, we have compassion, devotion, detachment. Hari Om.
Sir, a following question. We know that compassion, detachment, accepting a situation, a suffering is very, if people are spiritually inclined, it's easier sometimes, we say. But then how do we exactly counsel our patients? We know that post-COVID, there are a lot of people coming with depression, a lot of people coming with post-traumatic stress conditions. How do we practically approach people from a psychological perspective, and how do we inculcate the spirit of that the whole spiritual sense in humans who comes to us for our therapy or our advice?
Yes, that's very important, because there is a lot of depression, but we have to understand where the depression is coming from, and of course, what it means. And of course, it does show that we are out of harmony with our reality and the reality of nature. But don't treat depression as an enemy. Sometimes people are depressed because their lives aren't meaningful. So the question then is, how do we counter depression? And then that's also how we counter any negative state of mind, because they're conditioned patterns. In other words, if every day you give your attention to fear, you become a fearful person. If you give attention to fearlessness, you become fearless. We have this whole pratipaksha bhavana idea of opposite therapy at the level of the mind, and changing the energy of the mind. Depression means you have low energy in the mind, just as physical debility, weakness, low energy in the body. So how do you change the energetic pattern of the mind? It's very simple. Energetic pattern of the mind is reflected in the food we eat, the people we associate with, how we breathe, how we think, what we do, and it's possible to change all those things. What does yoga teaches us? Take, for example, a simple thing like mantra. The mind is dominated by its primary thought, the thought you have the most. So if somebody's suffering from depression, they're usually thinking about depression or things that make them depressed. And if anybody does that, after a certain time, the mind becomes what you think most about. If you're thinking about depression, then you become a depressed person. So we have to change our mental pattern. And take, for example, mantras are very clear, because the more we focus on the mantra, we can clear out the negative thoughts. And what happens with the mind, there's a certain simple rule. If you can get the mind to be 50% focused on something, it will go 100%. So if you take emotions, fear will push you over the edge very quickly because it has an instinctual basis. So we need to have primary thoughts, contemplative, meditative, that do that. Also, sensory impulses. If you're depressed, you're taking a lot of negative sensory impulses. You're watching things that are disturbing, fearful news. You'll notice that most of the time now we're giving our attention to screens, right? And it's not just a question of what is on the screen, it is the question of a screen. What I mean is that if you're looking at a screen all the time, we tend to become two-dimensional entities. We lose our depth perception. We lose our nuance perception. Everything becomes black and white, and we become easily disturbed by sensory factors. Go out at the stars at night, meditate on the sky for some time, and you'll notice your depth perception will come out. Go out in nature where there's subtle colors, and your nuance perception, no screen can equal that. So we have to learn to take positive control of our sensory field, right sensory nutrition. What are you giving your senses to all day long? If it's disturbances, or if it's an urban environment where you don't see any flowers or trees or hear any music, all of that, the mind gets depressed. Associations. Don't associate yourself with depressed topics and depressed people. And then have some confidence in your Paramatma. We are not simply victims of the outer world. That's a false thought. We are creative intelligence. We can change. So change your life, and you do it bit by bit. Every day, make one positive change to raise your level of awareness, whether it's meditating a bit, chanting a bit, going out in nature, and letting go of the past. The mind's biggest problem is our memory. Memory's gone. You can't change it. You can't change the past. Poor Freud made too many mistakes trying to change the past. You can only bring about transformation in the present by letting go of the past. And the past is already gone, but in any case. So be open to the present, the new. There are many things we can do. There's so much in the yoga psychology. There's so much in mantras and pujas and yagyas and nature, in temples and hiking and pilgrimage. Make your life into an inner adventure. Hari Om.
So we have a question from one of our participant, Suyash Dubey. So he asks, is mind have some limited or have a tendency to expand, or is it limited or has a tendency to expand? Does it really increase or decrease its tendency to restore the knowledge?
Well, let's again discriminate between mind and consciousness. A lot of what we call mind is not self-aware. We have, even as modern psychology knows, an unconscious, a subconscious. We have conditioned reactions. We get angry, we get fearful. So what we call the mind is a mixture of the conscious and the material. It is caught up in hormones, in sensory perceptions, in social imperatives, in various human needs. So it's caught up in all these patterns. It has a capacity to expand if we turn it within. And we're here talking about expanding beyond the past, beyond name and form. But the mind also likes to limit, because we need the mind to deal with practical reality, which is limited. Name, form, number, measurement. But we also have, because in the practical world, you have to know certain things, how to drive a car, you have to have a job, you have to know these things. But that is the mind's practical usage. Reality is consciousness. Reality is something more than the mind. And we all have an inner sense of self that we do not want to die, that we do not want to be unhappy, that we don't feel is limited. We have the reflection of the Paramatma. So we give the mind its place, but we don't think that we are limited to the mind. And we don't think, for example, that you are your memories. Memories are things that happen to you at a certain time. We can always do more. So we need to pursue meditation to open the higher levels of the mind. There are higher meditative sattvic qualities of the mind, but they must be cultivated. If you have a rajasic disturbed life, you will have a rajasic disturbed mind. If tamas prevails, you get caught in that. You have to cultivate the sattva guna to allow the mind to grow. But the mind wants to expand. Let the mind expand, but take it out where you have space. Sit on a mountaintop and look around and say, am I just this body, or do I have a connection with the whole of nature? Go out and look at the ocean. Mind wants to expand back to its origins in consciousness. We need focus of mind for working, but we have to move away from all these habitual responses, the dualities, love and hate, attraction, repulsion, like and dislike. And we have to stop being so disturbed at an ego level. If somebody doesn't like us, if somebody criticizes us, we can tolerate, we want revenge. See, that's the limited mind, the narrow mind. We need to cultivate the mind that is like the sky.
We have one more question from one of our participant, Vinita Nair. She asks that, what and when do we consider to be a normal mind? So what is a normal mind, or when we consider a mind as normal?
Well, I have to say that as normal human beings, we have normally disturbed minds. Even if you study the Vedanta, it's said that at the cosmic level, sattva guna prevails. But in the individual human being, rajas and tamas are there. And the same thing with the body. Some disease is natural to the body. It's part of the aging process. The body doesn't live forever. So the mind has certain inherent limitations. Some of these are necessary. For example, we need to have an instinct of fear in case something threatens us. There are certain things we need to bring into our life in a positive way. Mind has a role, but the ordinary human mind has a lot of disturbances. We try to move beyond them, but the human birth is a difficult birth. We must have compassion for ourselves and all human beings because it is hard. We have a life of a certain period. It takes us so long to be educated, learn a job, raise a family. We have all these political, social, financial disturbances. It's difficult, but just take this in mind. Whatever problem we have in life, it's better to address it with a clear and calm mind. You can find a solution. If you address your problems in life with more disturbance, anxiety, fear, depression, it doesn't help you. So remember that calming and clearing of the mind is the best thing to help you deal with the problems of the world. And at the same time, we do have our insight. There is the world of nature, and we do have examples of great human beings, gurus, avatars. Emulate the higher human beings, and that will raise us up. If we emulate the lower human beings, then that will carry us down. So carry a satsang, carry an association, associate with nature, and seek to raise your mind, raise your associations every day, mantra, whatever, study, prayer, vision. There's so many things you can do. And the more you put your energy into purifying, raising the mind, the more you can change the quality of the mind. You know, as we say, the gunas, let's look at water. You know, water, you have ice, you have flowing water, you have evaporated water. It's all water, but it depends upon how much heat. So you need to develop also not just the Jataragni and the Pranagni, but the buddhi, which is the agni of the mind. And then we can develop all the higher qualities of the mind. Hari Om.
Sir, we have one more query from the audience that it said that in ancient times, humans were able to use maximum percentage of their brains, like, you know, and now we can use around 10 to 20% of our brain. How can we increase it?
Well, we can increase the power of the brain by actually detaching ourselves from the body and not thinking about the brain. Again, the brain is an instrument of the mind. We need then to develop, again, the Dharana Shakti. That's the foundation of yoga. And on, of course, for that, the Prana Shakti. And even the inner seeing, you know, we have inner senses also, shruti, drishti. So the more we develop the power of attention awareness, the more we develop the power of the brain indirectly. Of course, Trataka, Dharana, Drishti Yoga, yantras, all these things help. Sri Yantra, of course, Krishna Kumar was a great master of that. We need to develop these inner tools. Shruti, listen to the mantras. Shravana, you know, you have to hear the truth from a higher source. You have to think about it, meditate upon it, and realize it. So make sure that you are studying these things, and don't worry about the brain, worry about developing the mind and the consciousness, and the brain will follow along with it. But to put it at a practical level, right food, right diet. We have all these media rasayanas. You have all this Ashwagandha, Brahmi, Mandukaparni, Jatamamsi. I mean, there's so many ways of Amla Haritaki. There's so many ways of the Medya Rasayana. And also, again, use the senses in a contemplative manner out in nature. Then the senses will stimulate the brain in a higher way. Avoid that which is depressing, dark, emulate to the higher light, and recognize that you have that inner Atma. We are not just the victim of the external world. We have the universe dwelling within us. So we also need, as we say, more inspiration, more aspiration, more bhakti, more jnana, and go into the Vedic teachings. There's so many tools there of working with the mind, the emotions, the prana, the senses, pratyahara. Don't get caught up in all these external disturbances. Focus your senses on the inner realm and turn what is the third eye? It's the unitary seeing. We need unitary hearing, full attention. And at the same time, we don't take that external to be limiting us. You are observing, which means there is an inner seer that is beyond the limitations of what you see.
Thank you, sir. We have two quick last two queries. I think I feel that it's good that we have a lot of response from our audience. So I think if I can take last two questions from the audience, sir, if you permit.
Certainly.
Yeah. So Rubia Ali, she asks that, sir, you have told about raga, dvesha, attraction, and repulsion. All these are emotions. Is it true that our mind gets attractive and addictive to false things more easily?
Well, mind is based upon avidya, lack of self-knowledge. Mind is looking outwardly, and so it is caught in a lot of external impressions. And some of these are even necessary. If someone is hungry, who hasn't eaten or drinking anything, then they have meant the mind also gets disturbed. So the mind has its limitations. It's a great instrument, but is not the means of inner knowing. Yoga is based upon silencing the mind. In fact, the silent mind has the greatest power of perception and original thinking. It connects the mind back to the Purusha, Atma, or the seer. So we have to understand the mind has an addictive nature, but we can also cultivate the mind's attention to turn within. And what you do the most with the mind will be the mind's nature. So the inward turning mind will eventually overtake the outward looking mind. And even you can look outwardly with an inner vision. What do I mean? Contemplative vision, if you're out in nature, looking at a beautiful tree, whatever, mountain, your mind is in a different sensory state than if you're indulging yourself at a simply sensory level. And don't let the mind control you. Mind is your instrument. Don't let it tell you what to do. Adi Shankara talks about that quite a bit. Oh, my mind, please behave. Be concentrated. Be still. Give advice to your mind. Don't let the mind's disturbances tell you what to do. And learn how the gurus train the mind.
We have one interesting question, that why motivation works for limited time when we start new work. It is from Mr. Ramanandan.
Well, motivation, we might even say sankalpa, it depends on our power of motivation. That's also willpower. Most of us don't have much willpower because we're running after what we want and we're running away from what we don't want. Willpower also means the power of your motivation. What you say, you do. And you have a motivation, you say, I'm going to do this, you do it. You don't just simply move from one thing to another. We all need to cultivate. Sankalpa is the root of the mind. What are your dominant sankalpas in life? What are your dominant motivations? They're usually running after external things, raga, dvesha, addictions, and all these other factors. But there's also the sattvic sankalpas, the satya sankalpa, where we have the motivation to find a higher truth. And that becomes the basis of dharana or attention, because you take an artist. Artist says, I want to be a great artist. That is my sankalpa. The whole life is then developed around art, the work, the seeing, the friends, the association. So you need to develop that sankalpa shakti to purify the mind and use the mind in the right manner. Mind is a wonderful instrument, but it must be focused and concentrated and connected to a higher motivation. And in that respect, mind is your best friend. Mind is your worst enemy. Mind is the basis of bondage or liberation. Learn to use the mind, learn to turn the mind within, and understand mind as a reflection of consciousness, and move from the reflection back to the pure light, not from the reflection outwardly into the darkness and shadows only. Audio.
So one last query, I think Rohini Subramanya, Bala Subramaniam is asked, does chanting, changing the pattern of mind, like becoming self-aware, create anxiety or fear in body? If it does, how to deal with it?
Okay. Fear in the body is again an instinctual factor. And then we have other types of fears. We have many social fears. We are not just the body and mind, we are social entities. So a lot of our fears are based upon trouble in society, job problems, relationship problems, financial problems. So actually the body is not in itself a problem. It's the mind that makes the body into a problem. Even how our body looks is usually a problem, more so for the mind. So peace of mind is the basis of bodily well-being as well. Just as the concentrated mind, ekagra chitta, is also connected, as we say, to ekagra prana. You have to have a one-pointed prana to have a one-pointed mind, which is a one-pointed sankalpa. And that also then brings unitary energy and harmony to the body, because otherwise the body's organs and systems get disjointed. We need to unify them through prana, through mind, through atma. Unitary awareness brings that about. But there will be, the body tends to have some fear when we change its pattern, and some resistance. For example, if you try to take on a new posture or a new exercise, go to a new place, there'll be some physical inertia you have to overcome. But once we get the body moving, then that inertia will go away. But to eliminate the inertia of the body, we have to eliminate the inertia of the mind. And that is what yoga, meditation, mantra creates a mantric pattern behind the mind, which neutralizes the memory, habitual addiction patterns that the mind is caught up with. If the mantra becomes your dominant thought, there cannot be any addiction or depression holding on there. The mantra will then come out and bring the mind back to its calm state. But again, the mind is a reflection of what you most do with the mind. So what are you most doing with the mind during the day? And see. And the mind also has to be trained, so that if you do a wrong action with the mind even one time during the day, it's like giving food to the dog. The dog is going to come back because it's getting the food. You don't have to be feeding it all day long. So the point is that you have to give the mind higher food, inner nutrition, impressions, mantra, prana, all these things. If we have that disturbed pattern of the mind, it's naturally going to tend to revert to it, but it's the wrong use of the instrument. It's not that the instrument itself is wrong.
So thank you for these insights. In fact, one last query is, we have a one-stop, solace is karma, theory of karma. When we suffer, whether physically or mentally, we always sometimes in Vedic thought process, blame it to our karma and the past life. What are your takes on that?
Well, first of all, karma is just the result of what we do, which is the result of our samskaras and our sankalpa. If you do something regularly every day, it creates a certain samskara or tendency, like a rut in the road if you take the same path. That's why in yoga we do this pratar smaranas. We do this, what do you remember in the morning, think in the morning, to change and to set in motion how the mind will move during the day. So karma's concentrated or densified thoughts which become action, and of course the thoughts have a desire, they have a motivation, and then that moves and creates a pattern. So you are not a victim of karma. The problem is some of the karmas we've set in motion were set in motion in a previous life, and we don't see the connection between karmas. In Ayurveda, karma is part of diagnosis. If pitta is aggravated, people are doing pitta disturbing action. The food is too spicy, too salty, too heavy. They're having anger. They're too much exposed to heat, to the sun, all these things. So you are not a victim of karma, but you've set in motion certain inertias that you have to change in the present. And karma is rooted on memory. So let go of your negative memories, but cultivate Atma Smarana, Smarana of the Ishta Devata. Change your memory pattern. You can do it. Just whatever you think about the most, memorize the most. We have karma to deal with. We have the karma of being a human being, which I said is not at all easy, but we can also take that as a challenge to grow. If we take something as an excuse not to do anything and to kind of give up, then, and that's bad psychology. If you want to change the psychology, you have to have a positive view, just as you have to have opposite therapy at the level of the body. You need opposite therapy at the level of the mind. Again, the Pratibhaksha Bhavana. And also, please get rid of your negative emotions. One of the problems with the mind is we often get too caught up in our negative emotions. We draw a certain pleasure from them almost. We don't want to let them go. And I've also seen that people are more happy with the pain of seeing the pain of people they dislike than of their own positive happiness. So let go of those, whatever problems we've all had them, let them go. Have a positive view for the future. Please wish well-being, happiness, shanti to everyone. That's a way of purifying your mind and purifying the collective mind as well. You don't have to hold on. The past is gone, let it go. Anything bad that happened to you, it's already gone. So don't hold on to it. Let a negative psychology go. Don't get engrossed in your problems. I know a lot of modern psychology likes to dig up the trauma from the past. I say, and yoga says, develop the positive vision. Ananda is the basis of consciousness, which is reflected in the mind. Dwell in your ananda. Let go of the raga dvesha. Hari Om.
Thank you, sir. I think last 1 hour was indeed a very intellectually charged session and a lot of food for our thoughts, Vamdevji. So I think I would now, I know it's kind of late night in your time zone, and I would request my colleague Kirtana to have the vote of thanks. But before that, I would, on behalf of the whole AVP family and Krish Kumarji's vision, would like to, from our bottom of our heart, thank your presence today and a very interactive people around us who really enjoyed your session. Thank you, sir. And I invite Kirtana to do a formal vote of thanks.
Thank you. Hari Om.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of our MD and our organization, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, respected Dr. Frawley, our CSO, Dr. Sumit Kumar, and all the participants here. I'm thanking you all on behalf of our organization I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Frawley for joining with us in a short notice and for being in touch with us with all your details, and also for the valuable insights you've given us, sir. It was really an enlightening session, and we are looking forward for more of sessions in future. And thank you so much once again, sir.
Well, thank you. It is my great honor to be where Krishna Kumar taught and your whole tradition. And there's so much that you represent in yoga, Ayurveda, and your Ayurvedic products so much. It's a great honor to me. And I look forward to further connections and even visits. So I'm very happy to be part of your family. And I think we are all part of that same interconnection, and let us take the message of the Vedic sciences, the rishis, Ayurveda. It's more than ever necessary today in our troubled era, and we have the power to transform that with this inner knowledge. Let's make sure that science and medicine today discover it. Hari Om, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Hari Om. Hari Om.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.